Hi, and welcome to the 8th day of Keysight University Live. I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, live from Colorado Springs, and I'm your host for this event. We have a great day planned for you. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we'll take a look at one of our high-powered power supplies. We have an interview with Chris Kane, who heads up the power supply group, among many other things. And then we'll draw today's prize winners. After that, we'll do some live Q&A, so put your questions and comments in chat now, and I'll look at them at the end. We also have a team who is monitoring those and are pulling aside questions for me for the end of this. First, though, let's take a quick look at the web page so that everyone is on the same page, pun sort of intended. So if we look at the web page for today, at the top we have today's live stream. If you're live with us, you can see this chat window, and that's where you can put in those chat things. We have a couple other things, some description of what's going on today. There's a couple buttons down below. Make sure to click both of those. One of them gets you an extra entry for each of the drawings. All entries are included in all drawings. And the other one lets you ensures if you only have to click the other one once, but if you haven't clicked it yet, make sure you have. That's how you stay up to date with other things we are doing. We have some special stuff planned just for folks who attended this event. And at the bottom of the page, we have a couple more things. We have today's video that also went live over on the Keysight Labs YouTube channel. I made a custom label for my scope out of FR4 PCB material. That was over a year and a half in the making for this video, and I'm really excited to share that with you today. We also have a featured Keysight University course with Bill Griffith, who you may have seen on some of our videos before. He's one of our power supply experts here at Keysight. Has some great insights in this video. And a couple other buttons that you might want to hit. This one lets you go check out all the previous day's event. This is day 8. There are 7 other days of event that you can go check out, each with an interview and a video. The Smart Bench Essentials Challenge is your way to earn yourself a set of gear instead of just leaving it up to chance and hoping that you win. And if you are interested in more bench power supply stuff, you can check out the bench power supply products catalog down at the bottom of the page. So first up, today we're going to take a look at some of our high-powered power supplies. We've used them in a couple of videos on the Keysight Labs channel, and I've even seen Great Scott use some of them for his projects too. So let's take a look at the new power supplies. Hi, I'm Daniel Bogdanoff from Keysight, and today we're going to look at the E36200 series auto-ranging DC power supplies. If you like the features of the E36312A triple output power supply, but need higher power and more current, the E36200 series is the obvious choice. It has the same capabilities, bench-friendly design, large display, ability to make accurate measurements without the need for an external DMM, and it also has layers of device protection including over voltage, over current, and over temperature. It also packs advanced capabilities, output list mode, output sequencing, and even data logging. Choose from 4 models. The 200-watt E36231A has a single output of up to 20 amps and 30 volts. The 400-watt E36233A is essentially 2 of these in one box. It has 2 independently controlled outputs of up to 20 amps, but they can be combined into one 40-amp output using the internally routed auto parallel mode. The 200-watt E36232A has a single output of up to 10 amps and 60 volts. The 400-watt E36234A is 2 of these combined. It has 2 independently controlled outputs of up to 60 volts, but they can be combined into one 120-volt output using the internally routed auto series mode. All 4 models use auto-ranging architecture to output more current at all voltages. This means more usable power for your applications. Many older supplies provided 2 power ranges. For example, a 200-watt supply would have an upper voltage range with 20 volts 10 amps and a low voltage range with 8 volts and 20 amps. An auto-ranging supply like this one provides higher current at more voltages. With higher current, it is important to be able to avoid large surges of inrush current due to a change in voltage. The E36200 series include a variable slew rate capability which dictates how fast the output voltage changes. Lowering the slew rate of the output voltage reduces the max current. For example, let's look at the charging profile of the supercapacitor. The built-in data logger captures the voltage and current measurements over time as the power supply charges the capacitor. A 5 amp current limit is set on the power supply as this is the max charge rate for this capacitor. When power is applied to the capacitor, the current limit is immediately reached and the capacitor charges at its max rate of 5 amps. Without the current limit enabled, we would destroy this capacitor. And even with the current limit, this sharp current spike as charging begins puts a lot of electrical stress on the component, so we can use the variable slew rate capability, causing the voltage to rise more slowly and effectively limiting our current. To see this, let's look at a simple resistor. Without the slew rate control enabled, our voltage jumps up when power is applied nearly instantaneously. However, with slew rate control enabled, we can set the ramp rate. Going back to our supercapacitor, when we enable slew rate control, we can see a more steady charging profile that will be friendly to the devices you are powering. In this case, we didn't even hit our 5 amp limit, which keeps the supply in constant voltage mode. This is a good way to limit inrush current and protect the devices you are powering. The data capture is then recorded on a USB drive and can be easily analyzed or documented using a tool like Excel. On the back of the supply, you'll find an alternative set of output connections ideal for use in a test system, as well as remote sense terminals. There's a digital I/O port that allows you to synchronize multiple instruments, and LAN and USB connections are included standard with an optional GPIB module. A compatibility mode makes it easy to replace an E3633A or E3634A without having to rewrite your program. For configuration questions or a demo, contact your local Keysight representative at www.keysight.com/find/contact us. You can also find the datasheet or get a quote from the supplies webpage. Thanks for watching. Those are a great piece of gear, especially if you have high current needs. Fun fact, on those we actually had to use non-standard connectors like the ones on this electronic load, because the normal banana jacks that you'd see on a power supply would actually melt under these currents. So we have these more, robust high current connectors. Next up is the interview with Chris Kane, the VP and General Manager of the Electronic Industry Group here at Keysight, which includes the power supplies we just looked at, also the electronic loads and these supplies, but also the handhelds and the Smart Bench Essentials gear, DMMs, function generators, and some of the super cool high-tech stuff like semiconductor device analyzers and source measure units. This interview is also filmed just before the COVID shutdown when Chris and I both happened to be at our lab in New Jersey at the same time, so it's a little different than some of our other interviews, but I think you're in for a treat. We also have another interview with Chris. It's a little more technical about power supplies in the power industry over on the EES Talk Tech podcast, Doubly's Talk Tech podcast, so you can check that out in your podcast tool of choice. Chris is also in the chat, so if you're watching live, you can chat with him in the chat, and he'll be there as well. So let's take a look at today's interview. I am joined again by Chris Kane. We're here in the New Jersey site, surrounded by some of the really cool and high power stuff that we have at Keysight and that they've built in this lab.
Power cables as big around as your arm.
One of the things that's really unique about you and your teams is they are just everywhere. Mm-hmm. So you said earlier, well, can you tell us where do you have teams of people?
Here in Bud Lake, in Loveland.
New Jersey. Loveland, Colorado.
I've got a couple people in Santa Clara. I've got a team in Hachioji, Japan, which is just outside of Tokyo. Taiwan, Singapore, Penang, China, and a couple people in the UK, actually in Edinburgh.
So just a couple places. So
yeah.
I imagine you're on the road a lot.
Yeah.
It seems like that the world is just getting more and more dispersed, but as it becomes more connected, it also becomes more dispersed. It's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. Can you, and you are, everyone I've talked to who works for you is just like, oh yeah, Chris is great. Can you talk about how you go about managing a team and tips for people who have remote employees or are remote themselves?
Okay, well, thanks, Daniel. No, I don't have all the answers. I've learned, like everyone does, the School of Hard Knocks, but there's also a lot of resources out there. I think just my couple of words of wisdom is if you have a natural wonder and appreciation for new things, different places, different people, different foods, different cultures, and really want to understand kind of the deep reasons behind why it's different, then you're all set. You're all set.
Sure.
Because that's really critical.
Okay.
And as you said, I've got teams all over the world, and they work together. And I've had circumstances, we talked about this earlier, where I've actually had teams where they literally worked, I wouldn't say 24/7, that's too extreme, but they worked a full 24-hour day during the work week, because like a team in the US would work their work day and then hand it over to the team in Asia, who'd be waking up at the end of the workday here in the U.S. and pick up the work and carry it forward. And the next morning, the U.S. team would pick it back up again and move it forward.
That's fast. So you're almost like pipelining.
Yeah.
Pipelining through time zones.
Yeah, it's actually, to be honest, it's one way to accelerate your workful. There are 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, because maybe it's a project is a like one person at a time sort of thing, and it's 100 engineer hours, but
Yep.
if you can make that 24, and you don't want that same engineer working 100 hours straight.
Yeah. And that was actually both hardware designs and software designs.
Hardware and software.
Yeah, you can share that. Now you have to architect and have architects leading it and linked together that are constantly coordinating and making sure that the communications are plugged in. You actually have to design the APIs in a way that there's some foundation that can span, 14 hours of time. Okay,
Yeah.
or even different cultures. And so that's part of the trick. You can make it work. Okay, and you get and it's not easy, but it's when you get it running, it's just like wow.
Yeah, that's like management bliss, right?
Well, yeah, you could you might look at it if you're on the other end, you might go you're wringing every last productivity dropout and maybe not the most elegant way. Yeah.
If people are working normal work days and you're getting two sets of people on it.
But it is very hard. It's a dynamic system.
For sure.
So it's like juggling things. It requires constant attention, and the whole system has to be architected to catch itself and rewrite itself all the time.
Okay.
So done that, and that's good. And then I think, right now, all my teams, I've actually focused them on areas that they either already were expert on or we needed to gain expertise. So like actually the team here at Bud Light are experts on power design. Mm-hmm. But that comes into a lot of measurement technologies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big time.
And so they frequently work with other teams. And in fact, we've actually taken some of their work and exported it out to have some of the other teams refine and do.
Interesting.
Okay? And
so they'll kind of do a first pass and then hand off
to another team to actually make other versions of that, because quite often we'll take a common power supply platform and elaborate on it again and again.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's almost like internally modular hardware or design work IP that you can get around.
And so I have in that case, they're kind of the technology experts. In fact, every group, like the group here is part of my power technology team. Okay. Actually, the team in Hachiochi, they do a lot of the precision measurements. So they're called the Precision Measurement Technology team.
Okay.
So they have these areas of expertise, and I plug them together. And I have a few people that actually report directly to me to help facilitate that.
Okay.
To help plug them together and to plug them to other parts of Keysight. Okay. So it's all about kind of keeping kind of the family aligned, but having an objective that you want to achieve with having all of that together. And so that's been working very well. Okay. We're having actually in Keysight, as we reorganized 3 or 4 years ago, one of the things is that we're really pushing on efficiency, R&D efficiency, new design efficiency. Right. So leverage and reuse. So actually, one of the teams that we're increasingly working with is the Scopes team in Colorado Springs, where you work.
Yeah.
And
Represent.
And in fact, right now, I just talked to my counterpart, Brad Dorr, and actually we're kicking off a project where we're actually going to share a new low-cost design for a new set of products. Cool. And share that work, because we both need that design, and we both have areas of expertise to bring to bear.
Okay.
And so
that makes sense.
We also have a lot of tools in Keysight that help facilitate. We obviously have email and communication tools like that, but we have things like telepresence rooms.
I love the telepresence rooms.
And but it's the other thing I would say is you have to actually know the advantages and limitations of every form of communication. So one of the things I've learned as a manager, and I've trained this in all of my managers and their managers, when you get an email that has this long string of emails, there's a lot of chitter chatter back and forth.
Yeah.
Whatever the topic.
Especially like you've woken up in the morning and you pull up your email and you go, oh, it's going to take me a cup of coffee to get through this one.
Yes. And you can also tell by the tone, it's very energetic. People are feeling very passionate about the topic, whatever it may be.
That's a nice way of saying that everyone's maybe not thrilled with the way things are going.
Frequently, yes. That's a clue that they need to talk to each other in real time. Because actually with remote, one of the things is different cultures, different locations, we have different values, different perspectives on things. And it makes it a little bit harder to make sure that we're sharing the same assumption. And with email for whatever reason, or text or anything like that, doesn't expose that very well. Okay. Whereas a conversation, you might go, well, Daniel, we were working on this new power supply, and I was kind of assuming it was connected to this line voltage. And you go, what? So a dialogue encourages a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas an email, you're bulking it up into a bundle, the message, okay, and it's much harder to check assumptions along the way. And so
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah.
So
That's
there's a few
fantastic.
tricks like that, and there's classes, and then the other thing I'd say is that get out there, and there's lots of material available, both inside our company and outside our company, on how to work through different cultures. Like I'll give you an example, like in Asian cultures, one of the things you'll find is that they, especially in China or Southeast Asia, they have three-part names. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Okay, and there's reasons for that. And one of the things you might have also noticed is that when they give you their formal name, not their email thing,
Right.
it's their family name is always first. Because in Asian cultures, your family and community is far more important than the individual. Now, I'm not saying that's good, or it's just different.
That's just how it is.
European and American culture, we celebrate the individual, okay, to the point where, like, it's Prince Charles.
Mm-hmm.
It's the individual,
Yeah. Interesting.
okay,
I didn't even know the last names.
but it's President Z. Or
Yeah.
Zhu. Excuse me. It's his family name.
Interesting. That makes sense.
It's just, and fundamentally, you just have to kind of reorient yourself depending on which way you're coming from. It's not a matter of courtesy. There's that. You always want to be courteous and respectful to people all the time. But you just need to remember how people are centered on their culture.
Yeah.
Because that's an assumption.
And that really informs how you talk to them.
Exactly.
And how you communicate with them. And I might have just
Exactly.
stolen your thunder, so I apologize.
No.
I realized you were getting there.
You're starting to see, and so that's just part of the journey, and it's kind of, you could say it's an empathy journey, but it's when you can see somebody through their eyes a little bit, it makes it makes me richer, okay, because then I can see more, I can understand more, and that's what I love about having remote sites and getting around. I just love learning and seeing new things. It opens my eyes up in ways.
Yeah.
So-
How does the cultural differences impact how different teams are able to work together, especially on like engineering projects?
It can make it easier sometimes and harder sometimes, because if there's a mismatch in expectations, you may make an incorrect assumption about why they did something the way they did. So when you're working with people that are outside of your culture, which can include even within regions, you need to ask. It's kind of a Kaizen is the Japanese method. It's the 5 whys.
Okay. Can you
keep
expand
asking-
on that a little bit?
Oh, the 5 whys.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm trying to remember a story here. You want to keep asking why till you really understand what's going on.
Okay. So my 3-year-old understands this quite well. And if we could limit it to 5, that would be great. So maybe I'll go home and...
It could take fewer. It may take more. It may take more. But, somebody might say, I'm having a problem with designing this product, and I think it's because the person I'm working with is just not capable. Okay.
And then I say, why?
Well, because I've talked to them. I've given a lot of material by email, and I've told them exactly what they need to do, but they just won't do it.
Why won't they do it?
Well, because I think they haven't had the right education. They're not the right experience set. But when I asked them, they said that they had leveraged another area and thought that would work better. But they never explained that to me, and I didn't know, so I couldn't tell them that might not work as well.
Yeah. That makes sense.
See, we're starting to dig a little bit.
Like the actual root cause, not just the outlet of frustration that you get in the first.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting. So
Probably
I'm
not
just
my
gonna.
best
All my
example.
emails will be 3 letters now. Why?
Why?
Send.
Well, it's one of my little tricks as a manager. Why is that?
Oh, that's a terrifying question. Yeah, my manager does that. Why'd you do it this way? It's like, oh no, here we go. I don't think he listens to the podcast, so hey, Joel. Yeah. Are there any other tricks or themes or challenges that you run into with global teams?
Yeah, I think I'll one more I'll give you is that, and it touches on the respect. Been in many places, my ability for foreign languages is zero. I can barely speak English, and but I found that if
Why?
I
No, sorry, go ahead.
why? Because my brain is not wired the right way. Anyway, but what I found is that if you make an attempt to be polite and learn a little language, at least try. Now, some people say there's an exception in France, and that's been somewhat true. But although I've talked to people in France, and even if I butcher it, they appreciate the effort.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a gesture of sameness almost. Like I'm
It
trying
is.
to come to you on your terms a little bit.
It is. But what I found, there's a universal language in showing respect.
Interesting.
And that breaks through anything. And once you get a handle on a few things like that, then you'll find that the barriers and the fear of the unknown, I have no fear of being anywhere I haven't been. Okay.
Sure.
Because I've been through enough places. I mean, well, I shouldn't take that back. There's some places that are kind of scary. Like in some places we were in New York yesterday, it was kind of scary.
My Uber driver was like, "Oh, I don't pick up people in that part of town. Don't ever go there."
So I'll modify that. I can see the listeners here saying, I think you're wrong, Chris. There are some places that are kind of scary. But I found it pretty universal to be able to, if you reach out to people, then they'll work to reach out to you. And that melts a lot of barriers. Okay.
Yeah.
And people, everybody appreciates that effort. And plus, again, as I said, I learned something then a little bit about the perspective of the other culture.
Have you seen, so shifting it from a global view to, the average tenure of someone who's worked at Keysight is, I believe, over 20 years. So if you're like average the years of service divided by the number of employees, people have worked here a long time.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a cultural difference in general? I mean, this doesn't have to be specific or about people, but like in how to work across generations of engineers?
To some degree, yes, but I also don't like to stereotype people at all.
I understand that, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there are, my kids are in their late 20s and early 30s, and they don't communicate with their friends the same way I communicate with my friends. Okay, so there's just differences there. Some of that's what you grew up with and what you learned, and that's fine. And then you get differences even in regions and cultures of how people work together. And so, but I will tell you, getting people together on food is always a common denominator.
Yeah, I'm always down for that.
Yeah.
But
you want to be aware and careful. When I lived in Singapore for 4 years, and lunch, many outsiders might think it's very challenging, but we had 5 or 6 dietary restrictions to deal with whenever I took my department out. Okay, and we just were used to it.
Sure.
And of course,
That's what you do, right?
What we do. And we lived in an area where every restaurant pretty much knew that to get business, they'd have to have, there's 2 different forms of vegetarian, especially with people that come from an Indian culture in some cultures, and Hindu, there's halal, there's Muslim, there's all kinds of variations. And so in cultures where they're used to that, it's just naturally there. But what's interesting is in cultures where it isn't, I'm so used to, you put a little extra work and it's not that hard, but it is so deeply appreciated that I'm respecting your preferences.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a common language.
And accommodating for like the convictions there of, you're not just going to get another salad with, oil dressing. It's going to actually be something that's...
Yeah, that common denominator is...
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's tricky.
So I don't know if that answered all the questions. I encourage people to take the journey and experiment a little bit. I'm just tickled. I learn new things all the time. And even New York. That was actually the first time I'd been in New York, was this weekend.
Really?
All these years of traveling all over the world. Well, I tend to go to places that either involve electrical engineering or manufacturing.
Yeah. And there's just not a lot of tech. And there's software
tech
guys.
used, there's software
folks.
but not much test and measurement tech. So that was the
hardware.
first time I've been in the city.
Fascinating. Yeah,
and I found it fascinating. It was diverse, global in a way I've rarely seen. In that you see a lot of diversity in big cities, okay, but they tend to be pretty regionalized.
Yeah.
But that was everywhere was there. You saw. I noticed and heard languages and accents from every corner of the globe, from Africa, from Europe, from the Middle East, from multiple parts of Asia. because I can actually, I lived 4 years in Singapore. I've spent many time,
And
much
Singapore
time in
is
Asia.
much like Malaysia, is notoriously kind of a cultural melting pot of different.
It definitely is,
different
which
regions
which
there.
I thoroughly enjoyed. So you get to access all of that, and just there's a beauty and just a different perspective that's unique for a kid that grew up in the heartland of the U.S. in Iowa. So.
Okay, last question I want to go out on. It's maybe a big one. Is how do you go about? So you have teams and you hire people fairly regularly. How do you go about finding the right person from someone that's not from your like native culture, or like are there things you look for or things that help kind of bridge that gap from a hiring perspective?
There's a lot of similar. I mean, you're looking for technical skills. In our field, electrical engineering and computer science, that kind of transcends cultures and language because a lot of it's English at this point.
Yeah, science.
Science. So that's helpful. But the skills vary. I don't know. To me, they vary with the people, not necessarily with the cultures.
For sure.
So I'm trying to find a great person who has the right mix of talent and skill and knowledge, but also a sense of wonder, and they're driven to make themselves better.
Yeah.
That's universal. That's not specific to any culture. And then there's maybe aspects of the way they do things that's different. Different's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Different's good. So there's a lot of, I'm very firmly convinced of the power of diversity, but in a very broad sense.
Yeah.
So for example, I'm very careful about the staff around me to make sure that they just don't do the things that I want to have done. So as an executive, I have to make sure to be patient and not judge things that are being done in the way I wouldn't do them. But if the work still gets done, that's great.
That's hard. Yeah.
In some cases, it might get done better than I could have done. And I find that fascinating.
Cool. That's great. Well, we're out of time again. It just goes so fast, and I'm always sad when it's over, and I'm sure you are too. Yes. So that's it. I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, again joined by Chris Kane. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody.
So huge thanks to Chris for sitting down and letting us use this clip and even being in chat today. If you want to hear more from Chris, we have another interview with him about power supplies. Gets a little more technical, that one, over on the Double E's Talk Tech podcast. If you like video, we have that same setup on the Keysight Podcast YouTube channel as well. So you can go check out that interview over on KeysightPodcast.com or searching for Chris Kane. I think you'll find it. And now it's time for today's winners. Every event day as part of Keysight University Live, we have 9 winners. And coming up on April 27th, the last day of the event, we're live each Tuesday until then. But on the last day of the event, we have bonus winners as well for a total of over 100 winners as part of this event. 3 winners today will win a U1282A handheld DMM. 5 winners win their choice of a SmartBench Essentials piece of test gear that includes a DMM function generator, power supply, or oscilloscope. I had one right here earlier. I was going to pick it up and show it. And we have a first prize winner who wins their choice of a high-end oscilloscope like this 3000T or a bunch of other types of gear like a nice power supply, a DMM power supply function generator, signal generator I think is in that list as well. There's some really awesome prizes. So let's read off today's winners. We announced the first 4 already at the video at the bottom of this page and over on Keysight University Live, or on the Keysight Labs YouTube page, but we're also going to announce those winners here today in each place. Today's test gear winners are the SmartBench Essentials, Bernard Ryan, Nicholas Oikonomidis, Steven Seraph, Logan Van Grisven, and Jake Nura. Congratulations to those winners. Sorry if I messed up your last names. I understand having quite the last name. The U1282A winners are Elias Tiso, Werner Goldman, and Mir Mahmoud. And the first prize winner, who gets their pick of one of these or a bunch of other high-end test gear, is Adrian Schut. So congratulations to Adrian and all of today's winners. We actually had winners from 3 different continents today. Each Tuesday, we're also announcing the winner of the SmartBench Essentials contest. Let's take a look at today's winning entry. There's a link to this entry over on, if you scroll down on the Keysight University Live page, and if I can get my mouse over here. And I'll read off the judge's take on why this person won the SmartBench. There we go, got my mouse. So Today's winner is David Oliznik. Congratulations, David. He put together a great write-up and a great video. I'm a sucker for time lapses, as you probably saw in today's video over on the Keysight Labs YouTube channel. So he opens with one of those, which is fantastic. And the judges said, David stood out to us because of his creativity and engineering spirit. At Keysight, our goal is to inspire the possibilities and innovation in electronic design and development. David's current ability to design is limited by his bench equipment. He clearly demonstrates that the benefits that the Smart Bench Essentials series will have on his ability to innovate and bring his ideas to life. We can't wait to see what David will come up with next. So congratulations, David, you won the Smart Bench Essentials Challenge. There are 3 more winners coming, and you win a full set of Smart Bench Essentials gear. That's a scope, power supply, DMM, and function generator. So go to the bottom of this webpage to see a link to go enter that challenge. It's a cool program. And now we're going to transition into live chat. The team has been monitoring chat and sending me questions, and I also have the live stream chat popped up now. So if you have questions for me, go ahead and put them in chat now. We'll take a few minutes to take some of those. Also, thank you to Chris Kane for being in chat today and for your interview. Question, any idea how much the custom PCB panel costs to get made? That they're referring to my video earlier today on the Keysight Labs channel with these custom top labels and the front labels. We also did a time lapse with some little round PCBs that turned out really, really well. It really depends on your fab and who you use. I went with Oshpark so I could get their After Dark boards. I really like how the gold and the copper play together, and that clear sheen made a really cool label. But we were able to save some costs on it because it's only one-sided. We didn't do any silk screen on this. There's no white printing. It was just metal. So if you're doing something like this, you can often work with the fab to get a specific quote. It's not necessarily the cheapest. Stickers are much cheaper. So like the EEV blog version is much cheaper. This is screen printed on. Someone asked about this also. We used our existing manufacturer. Someone asked about it on YouTube. I don't know if it came up in chat. We use the same label maker that we use for the rest of our normal Keysight products, but it's basically just screen printed on a 3M adhesive. This is 467 MP with 200 MP adhesive is what we use. So it's a nice solid feel. It's pretty sturdy, but then it just sticks right on like a sticker. You can also get like translated overlays. So if you speak not English natively and don't want English on the front of your scope, you can slap on an overlay that's very similar in thickness to those that has localized versions of text. And of course, the scope itself is localized into a bunch of different languages as well. You can get to that from the help menu if you ever want to play around with that. A bunch of our test gear, we're global. People use these all over the world, all sorts of countries, so we translate into a bunch of different languages. People want the SVG files for the front panels, especially like the 1204A. I will work on making some files available. If you follow me over on Twitter, that's probably the best place to do it. That's probably where I'll put them public. So if you want to see the files, I'll try and make some of those available. I have to make sure I'm not going to get in trouble with IP folks to release those files, but at least some maybe design files for this top labels. I've wanted to make one for the Smart Bench Essentials because the labels all look the same, so I thought it'd be super cool to do that. Fabs also usually charge by the square inch. So something like this top label is not very expensive to make. That's a couple square inches, but something like the main front panel label is going to be more expensive because it's like 6x4, so that's like 24 square inches. So you're potentially looking, sub $100 for a label like that, but not cheap. I mean, it's definitely not free, where stickers are much cheaper. Someone asked if the connectors melt. This is about the connectors on the power supplies and the electronic loads. Someone asked if they melt at 20 amps, why doesn't my old E3633A manage to output the same connectors? I believe the higher end electronic loads and power supplies go over 20 amps. You can kind of chain them together to get a lot more current. The connectors all have a different set of ratings, and there's trade-offs. So as you go to higher ratings, you lose performance in other areas. So each time we develop a new product, we look at the different connector options out there and figure out what's going to work best for that power and voltage and current requirements. Good question. How many how many amps does it take to melt a 1 millimeter wide trace on a circuit board? That would be an interesting video, wouldn't it? To make a little PCB with different traces and ground plane performances, and then just fry them and see what it takes. That I may take notes. That'd be a fun video for future. If we do that, it'll be over on the Keysight Labs YouTube channel. I really like that idea. The problem with doing PCBs and videos is it takes a long time to make. This took a year. There were other factors, but this label is a year and a half in the making. I started working on it in 2019. But there's at least a couple weeks of turn for PCBs usually to actually design it, get it, test it, and film the video. But I really like that idea. I think we should give that one a go. Couple questions about the EDU power supply. I unfortunately don't have one on hand. I think I was working on another video with it at home. But they do a lot of the same capabilities. If you go back to day one, we look at the Smart Bench Essentials products a little bit, including the power supplies, so there's some overview there. You can also check out the webpage. There's a bunch of information there, but it does a lot of the same things that the other Smart Bench Essentials do. So it has the remote application, it does parallel and stereo ports, it's triple output power supply. It's very, very similar to our much nicer power, much higher power supplies. That's kind of heavy. It's a lot like these, but it just doesn't have the same current and voltage performance as like this is the E3633, E36313A. So this is a pretty high power, high current supply for a triple output power supply. But the EDU just doesn't go as high up in power, but it has a lot of the same performance capabilities. So good question. What else? Let's see. Someone's asking about selling direct in India. Every country has their own unique rules and requirements and regulations. So if you want to figure out how to buy any of these products, you can go to keysight.com/find/distributor and find a distributor, or keysight.com/find/contact us to figure out how to best purchase equipment in your country. You can also go to the webpage and just get a quote for a specific product, and that will get routed to the right folks, to distributors or direct sales or whoever you need to talk to based on your region. But you can filter by region, which is really helpful because, again, we do sell these all over the world. So that gets pretty tricky on the back end side. What else? Sorry, I have like 3 different chat windows open here. Let's see. Can we share the board art? Yeah, I talked about the board art a little bit. Back when we made this front panel sticker, we talked about that one too. Someone said, I'd love for Daniel to do an old school vacuum tube gear, maybe old gear meets benchtop era current oscilloscope. I really like that idea too. That's been in the back of my mind for a while, to do an analog scope versus a digital scope, because that question comes up all the time. My personal opinion is that analog scopes should kind of stay in the 20th century, and we're now on to digital scopes, but other people have very strong feelings about that. So I'm curious. That's been in the back of my mind. I definitely want to do that at some point. Time is of course limited, so if you want to come make videos with us, shoot us an email, reach out. Maybe we'll hire you. That happens. I'm not going to read that question. PCB with a spark gap built in. We do have some gear with spark gaps, especially like high voltage probes have breakdown voltages and spark gaps. I've seen spark gaps on PCBs. I'm not sure how much they're built into this type of thing. If Chris is still in chat, maybe he would know. He's been involved in power supplies for quite a while. I think we have until the top of the hour. So if someone knows, I know we do design them in, but not for every product and every situation. And I'm not really a PCB design expert. So if you Google it, I'm sure there's some great resources on it. Speaking of great resources, for the ART PCBs, we use both Inkscape and KiCad or KiCad, depending on how you want to say it. I know that even the people who developed the program, like you can just say it either way, however you want. There's some great tutorials on how to actually do that. For these, I had to take an art file in Inkscape. There's a plugin called SVG to Shenzhen. That's also open source. It's on GitHub. That's an extension for Inkscape, and you can install that plugin into Inkscape, take an art file, and basically save it as a footprint and import it as a footprint into KiCad. So that's what I did for these. There's some other tools to import graphics, like KiCad has a built-in silkscreen graphics. Take a JPEG or a PNG and plug it in as a silkscreen. The resolution was pretty rough on those, which is why I didn't go that route. I've heard Eagle has some other options, but I've not really used Eagle much, and I like the idea of being able to do it all with an open source tool chain. If you want tutorials on how to actually do some of these things, like importing a footprint, creating your own footprints, exporting Gerber files for a fab, doing Inkscape art, there's tons of tutorials out there. If there's something specific you're trying to learn how to do, there's a couple places you can go. For KiCad, I highly recommend either Chris Gamel's contextual electronics information. He has basically Getting to Blinky with KiCad that goes through how to just get started and set up in KiCad. And also, the one I used to learn KiCad was Sean Hemel's series on getting started with KiCad. So I would encourage you to check out both of those. They're both fantastic resources for getting your hands dirty and actually doing something like this. Because when I got into this and started doing it, it was really difficult to figure out how to actually go about it. There's a lot of different factors, which is part of why we put together the video earlier today. Caleb Begley, Fun and Tech, good to see you again. He says, Eagle recently got merged into Fusion 360, so you can't get it standalone anymore. Ooh, yeah, I know, and it costs more now. I know Fusion 360 has been going through some changes. As I recently have gotten into 3D printing, I've seen so I'm coming in on the back end of some of that, but that's good to know. Yeah, I think KiCad's a great program. It does a lot of things well. If I were in a corporate enterprise environment, I'm not sure that I would love it for everything, but I'm also not the best to speak to that. But for me, it worked great. Question, is it possible to solder a cable to a test point on a populated PCB and plug the cable into the bench power supply? And you're asking Chris, I'm going to respond to this one as well. It is possible, and we actually see that more commonly with things. Usually, you put some sort of connector, like a banana jack or one of those screw-down terminals, and you can run leads to it. That's totally a thing that people do, especially if you have a PCB that requires a power supply. You don't want to necessarily test it with like a wall wart, 12-volt power supply, for example. You want to test your designs with something that's going to be a little more stable than one of those, plug-in buck boost converter type units. So using a power supply for something like that is highly recommended. My recommendation though is to design in your connectors, figure out what it's going to be, and then work on connecting your power supply to that connector. So if you have a barrel jack, for example, I'm thinking through a project that I have going on at home. If you have like a barrel jack, get a barrel connector, chop it off, and connect it up to your power supply. Would be the way that I would recommend doing something like that. And then you can actually test it on board, on system with a full test suite. The nice thing about power supplies is they're super stable. So if you draw a bunch of current, if you short them out, there's a bunch of protection features built in. So you can do overcurrent protection, where if it gets too high, pulls too high of a current, it just shuts down, which is a great way to protect your board. And a standard like wall wart boost converter is not going to do that for you typically. It's just going to burn up your device. So testing with the power supply is super useful. In the electronics bench video from March 15th, it's on the day one page over on the Keysight Lab or over on the Keysight Labs YouTube channel. We also looked at this little USB, I think it's from Lewis Lab. It's a USB thing PCB that takes a USB female connector onto a PCB and then has spacings for barrel connectors, and you can basically test a USB device by plugging it right into a power supply. It has like banana jacks and a USB receiver. It's a really cool thing. I use it all the time for my PCB projects, or for my USB projects. Back to the spark gap question. Caleb's jumping in again. Thank you, Caleb. He says, EEV blog has a great video on that, and judging from Dave's latest teardown of the multimeter, GDT tubeless are used in Keysight. GDT tubes are used in Keysight products. So that's basically a protection capability built in. We'll take a couple more questions, and then we will call it a day, and we'll be back next week. One question about the winners. Are you choosing SmartBench winners at random? This week's winner's entry is older than the previous. So the SmartBench challenge is not random. There's judges, and they choose a judging. They look at all the entries, and they pick from all the existing pools, and are picking one winner per week. So this, I think they choose by maybe Friday or Saturday each week. I know I'm getting emails on the weekend from the judges because they want to give people as much time as possible to enter. They are choosing from the pool of all existing entries. So the sooner you get your entry in, the higher the chance you have of getting, the more prizes you could potentially be eligible for. However, we're not doing just only the entries from this week are included. So once your entry is in, you don't have to resubmit it every week. It's included for all of the judging criteria. And they have a whole crazy spreadsheet of all the entries and are taking notes. So if you enter, it's in for all of the contests. The judges will see them all and weigh all of the existing pool of entries for the next winner. And we'll announce next winner next week. A couple other questions. Is it possible to embed some SMD resistors between PCB layers? That's a great question. I know there's some like on-chip resistance things you could do. I don't know. That's a good question for a fab. One shout out is the Euro Circuits group let me use a lot of their footage from how a 4-layer PCB is made in today's YouTube video. So shout out to them for letting me do that. Their analysis and breakdown of how a 4-layer PCB is built is really, really great. It's like 30 minutes long and narrated and just goes through every step of the process and explains why they do things and how they do it, including how they glue layers together. So that was what triggered that thought. But that's a really cool video to go check out after this one if you haven't watched the other Keysight University live days, of course. Let's take one more question. Is this a linear transformer or SMPS? So this is a linear, all of our bench power supplies are linear transformers. If you saw the electro turbo encabulator video, that giant toroidal transformer that was in the front is actually a opened up power supply. So these things are linear, and you get much better, you get a lot better performance out of these and a lot better stability, but they're really heavy and they're more expensive to build. So obviously you wouldn't put something like this in a IoT device, for example, just because it's so big. And it's you can even see the transformer is bolted in here is like a feat of engineering to keep this thing sturdy and passing drop tests and all that, because they're pretty big. So, and then SMPS, of course, is switch mode power supply, and that's where you get the smaller switching supplies. But you get a lot of switching noise. They're not quite as robust, but they're really small and they're pretty cheap because you basically can just, if you want to learn more about switch mode power supplies, I'd encourage you to go check out the Electro Noobs channel. He did a great video on buck converters, boost converters, and buck boost converters with schematics and how they work. So I'd recommend going to check that out. I also, at some point, want to do more with the electronic load to talk about those. So I think that's about it. What about the grand prize? Another prize question, is it selected randomly at Seeker 44? Yes, all of these sweepstakes prizes are selected at random from all of the entries. So hitting that Get My Daily Entry button gets you an extra entry into the overall pool, but all entries are included in all drawings. So those are random. I don't go into too much detail about how we actually go about drawing them, but Legal has looked at the program that we use, and it is sufficiently random. We pick them at random, but the more information we give out, the more people try to game the system and stuff. So we've had some people try to do that this year. Don't do it. You've been caught. You won't win. But don't panic if you registered with one email address one day and came back a week later and used a different email address because you forgot. That's okay. I can see all the entries and kind of do some pre-screening to make sure everything's above the table. I think that's a great way of vibration testing with toroidal transformers can be destructive. They're talking about the transformer. Yep. I think it is time to call it a day. Thank you so much for joining in today. This program is just so much fun for me, and it looks like it's a lot of fun for you as well, and hopefully you're learning a lot and leveling up your engineering skills. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, and I'll see you next week.